Welcome to the Shame-Free Zone. I have a special guest today. This person has been a friend of mine for a very long time, at least 15 years, maybe closer to 20. I'm not sure. We've lost track, but I can tell you I adore her. She's got a huge brain, and one of the things I love about the way she thinks is she connects all kinds of things that might seem unrelated. So today, she and I are going to talk about healing sexual trauma, but you don't know where we're going to go with the conversation. We might wind up talking about mushrooms or stardust or honeybees. It's just going to be one of those conversations. So let me introduce my good friend, Teri Ciacchi. Teri, thank you so much for joining me in the Shame-Free Zone.
Oh, it's so great to see you and to get to spend time with you.
Well, I love you dearly, darling. And I'm going to actually read your bio to everybody, even
Great.
though you and I know what it says. They don't. So let me just introduce you formally to the people that are watching us right now. So my friend Teri Ciacchi is actually Reverend Teri Ciacchi. And she is the relational matrix of something called the Living Love Revolution, which is and she's also a holistic sex educator. That's why we're talking to her today. She is a priestess of Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the goddess of love and also animals, by the way. She's a leader of the EcoSexuality movement and an EcoMagicks practitioner. She also founded the Interdependence and Autonomy LLC, which is a for-profit business that builds consent culture by healing conflict through education and legal advocacy. Did I tell you? She's got her fingers in all kinds of pies here. Reverend Ciacchi looks to nature for guidance and wisdom. This is something where she and I really resonate because I get messages from nature all the time. And she translates the teachings she receives from, here we go, the mycelium, for those of you who don't know, that's mushrooms, bees, and stardust into usable social skills for human beings. Now, isn't that beautiful? Teri, I just adore you. So I'm going to actually let you kick us off with this topic about healing from sexual trauma. And
Great.
I don't know if maybe you want to share with the viewers a little bit about your own history with sexual trauma. Most of the people that are tuned in the Shame-Free Zone know that I'm an incest and rape survivor.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something you want to share, or at least let them know how you got interested in this topic.
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say, while you were reading my bio, I have my computer set up so I can look at my garden, which has really been my salvation during this pandemic and this, stay-at-home thing. But a great big black crow swooped down and is now sitting in my water dish, drinking water. It's so beautiful. And at first I was like, there was a shadow that went across my visual field, and I went, oh, and then I saw that it was that crow, which is gorgeous.
Oh.
So nature's presence known.
Totally.
Yeah, I grew up in a working class Italian-American household, and the sexual oppression there was pretty heavy. And I have survived incest and early on a pretty nasty date rape where I got pregnant and had to have an abortion. And that was like during my first year at school when I was 18 years old. So those are really pivotal experiences that I kind of transformed my personality, that for years the traumatic response that I had to those events, unconsciously ruled me. But I did decide to go into social work. I got a master's in social work administration. I was a psychiatric social worker for 8 years out of grad school. And then I started the Living Love Revolution. I'm really very much interested in holistic healing, right? And allowing people to really lean in and look at their woundedness and heal, right? And so I feel like I'm a really good example of someone who not just survived, but thrives and helps other people because I see that there's a connection between the way that the body holds trauma, which is physically, and everybody, hopefully people are aware of the cutting edge work that's out there right now about trauma remediation and trauma integration, and the works of people like Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk and all of that. So if your body holds the trauma, then the body is what needs to be worked with.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that. And then there's also a deep resonance physically between the trauma that happens to nature and the actual land of nature, and traumatic events that have happened in the land, and, you know, epidemics amongst indigenous people, the burning times in Eastern Europe, all of those things. And the culture doesn't actually heal those things, and they're in the zeitgeist, they're in the soul of the culture, waiting. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it's a brilliant design and it's a difficult design. Trauma stays around at a low level, agitating our nervous system and magnetizing towards it similar enough events so that things are recreated in the, I believe the design is intelligent, and it's in the hopes of us recreating situations so that we can heal and evolve and go on. But frequently we fall into the hole and we forget that we're in the hole, and we re-traumatize ourselves and dig a deeper hole, you know. So there's all those connections, right? Yeah, right?
I've definitely done that.
Yeah.
And Teri, I just wanted to share with our viewers, I absolutely adore your strengths as a coach. You've coached me personally through some of my own traumatic life events, and you're really skilled at it. You've got a lot of bright lines around consent and women's empowerment that are just really speak to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really super aware of all the different, being able to distinguish, and I'm about to teach this in I teach a series of classes called Cascadia Holistic Peer Counseling, which teach people to counsel each other so they can have peer counseling for the rest of their life that's free in a network. And the 12th class in the series of 12 is on societal oppression. So just this afternoon, I was rereading the material and looking at how important it is for people to be able to distinguish a societal oppression from a personal problem, right? Like a lot of the problems that we have that keep us from being able to naturally heal and integrate trauma are societal oppressions, such as, you know, patriarchal dualistic religions that are deeply misogynistic. And so you might have ideas or thoughts in your head that are recurring about your value and your worthiness that are artificially wrong, but they are difficult to uncover because the entire culture you're immersed in holds that women's value is less than men's value. And so it's hard to create a temporary autonomous zone, right? Where it's true that women and men are equal, or that all beings are equal, and that there's more than two genders, you know, all those things. So there are a lot of beliefs that are held in common that make our recovery difficult.
Yeah, and you know, I was listening to a therapist yesterday talk about how our trauma also originates from our ancestors, and sometimes those ancestors are distant, and some of them, sometimes they're parents.
Right.
But this particular therapist had clients who maybe at age 16 suddenly started having some strange physical symptoms, like their skin was burning or something, and they couldn't understand it. And then they unpacked the family history and found out that their grandmother at age 16 was, you know, had an accident in a fire or something.
Yes.
Those sort of things. I'm thinking you probably know so much more about this than I do. It's something that's a new topic for me. And I just was kind of thinking, wow, like not everything I think and feel is even about me.
Right.
Yeah. So I would love to hear what you know about that.
Yeah. So there is a new language that has been coming up, kind of keeping pace with the new information about neurobiology and brain science, and people who are inventing new fields of study, like Dan Siegel, who's created the field of interpersonal neurobiology.
Right.
And one of the newest things is called epigenetics, right?
Right.
So they found that there are markers on DNA that cause a person to have a traumatic body memory that was something that happened to their grandparents, right? So the particular, let me think if I can reference this accurately. There was a BBC show about genes that was showing that some of the people that survived the Irish potato famine, their grandchildren had gene markers that also caused them to not be able to get enough nutrition. Does that make sense?
Wow.
And there are people whose grandchildren, the grandchildren of people who survived the Holocaust, who have higher than average levels of anxiety and cortisol in their system, right? Because of the memory of the Holocaust. So there are indeed now scientifically verifiable evidence of trauma being passed on through the genes genetically.
And that could be really discouraging for those of us that are on a personal healing journey. It can feel like, well, how am I supposed to transmute everything that happened to me and also everything that happened to the people before me?
Yeah.
And as I understand it, there's actually a more hopeful message around that.
Right, because the other thing is that you could actually start to send healing back, right? So one of the things is that you could start to see that not only are our nervous systems elastic, not only are our brains and nervous systems more resilient and have more plasticity than we thought before, right? Because nothing is actually, you can teach an old dog new tricks, right? You can change your attachment style, right? And we didn't used to think this. When I was in graduate school in 1986 to 1988, yep, I'm 58, right? We were taught that there were certain people with some chronic mental illness diagnoses, like borderline, that those people were like, you just cannot heal them. There's no way to heal them. Give it up, right? But now we know, goddess bless Marsha Linehan, who lives in Seattle and started dialectical behavior therapy. And then came out after it was seen as successful. You know, she worked with the University of Washington, which is a very well-known university and college, and she started doing group therapy for people with borderline personality diagnoses.
Right.
And provided a whole healing structure where people are taught self-modulation and self-regulation of their feeling states. And then after that was successful, she came out and disclosed that she had a borderline personality disorder herself, right? So people who were really brave like that, right, who healed themselves because it's their own prerogative that they be healed. Like they're like, I am going to heal myself of this thing, right? And then I'm going to offer it to other people, right? So those things are useful. And then again, I was starting to talk about plasticity. So it's also that we're more miraculous and awesome and larger than we know. And history isn't static. The future isn't static, right? So we used to think it like time is like a line, but what if it's a spiral? What if it's like a slinky and it can be expanded or contracted and energy can go along it forward or backwards as you will it to, right?
All right, now you're going into quantum physics.
There we go, that's right. I don't know the right quantum words, but I have a really good
I warned you guys, you're in for a ride here.
So one of the things that's really useful, because we know we get to determine existentially, we don't actually ever know if any of this stuff is true. We don't know if gods and goddesses exist. We don't know if other beings actually have animate souls. I'm an animist, so it works for me to believe that animals and insects and trees and rocks and the sky have soul force in them. It pleases me to be connected to them in that way. It pleases me to experience them as sovereign beings with their own personhood. That works for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if any of that's true, but what we do know is you get to decide what gives you meaning. So you have the right to create, so existentially it's like whatever you believe is what's going to happen,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's really useful to believe that I can send healing to my ancestors, right? So one of the things that I found after I healed myself from my sexual abuse is that I went through this huge, great phase of doing all kinds of BDSM things to play with power and change take as many different positions around power as I could, right?
Right.
But I was like, oh, I tried everything I wanted. And now I could start to think about, well, what was it for all the other women in my blood lineage? Did any of the other women in my blood lineage, did they ever have an orgasm? Did they ever ejaculate? Did they ever have anything like the idea of sexual sovereignty that I have? Yeah. Right? Like I would never agree to something I didn't want. Well, that's a hell of an empowered position to have.
Yeah.
Right? And historically speaking, in the timeline of what I understand has actually happened, very few women have had that privilege, if you want to call it a privilege. I think it should be a right, but
they're right.
So I started to do sex magic in that when I had my own ejaculations or orgasms, I would send that energy like a golden wave back to my mom, my grandma, back up the line. And I feel like it helped them change, right?
Yeah. Teri, I agree that we don't actually know very much. There's this way in which we seem to arrive here a little confused about how we got here and where we came from. And then we wonder always where were we going and what's the reason and all these existential questions. But I have an experience of communicating with spirits who are on the other side. And I recently had an experience of communicating with my father, who's been dead for about 4 years.
Oh, right.
And my father was an extremely mentally ill and dangerous human being. And I didn't want anything to do with him for a long time. But I was doing some healing work on his behalf right now with our family of origin because some of his relatives were being really kind of cruel towards him, even though he's dead.
Oh my
and
God.
I was calling them out, asking for compassion and pointing out that he was mentally ill, and which is probably something that they had no idea. And so I have compassion too for their confusion and anger. But in the process of going through that with these relatives, I started to feel a heart opening in myself of feeling more compassionately connected to my dad. And then one night, I felt the presence of this side of him. I feel like his personality was deeply split. And he had a really evil side and a really innocent side. And I just felt connected to that innocent side momentarily, and it felt very real to me. So in my reality, that was, his soul and my soul connecting around the healing work that I'm doing on this plane and in this lifetime with real people that he knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job.
It was powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I frequently say that my relationship with my father vastly improved after he died. Our conversations were freer, right? Yeah. And I did a lot of really specific work, some ancestral resonance work to uplift his soul, to make sure that he passed on and got assimilated with a larger pool of ancestral beings from my lineage. And I took him to ecstatic erotic events and I have some of his ashes, so I put them on the altar and dedicate energy and merit to him. And so I feel like we're really good friends now as adults, Yeah. And that a lot of healing happens a lot faster when people aren't in their bodies.
Yeah, like, that's true. Really and can you explain that? Because I
can't explain it. It's a mystery, but I can feel it. It's palpable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the body slows things down. Just like think about Earth and how as an element it's different from air, right? So it's a heavier thing. It's more, I don't think the spirit without a body gravity doesn't have an impact on it, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's that.
one of the things that comes to mind for me is Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of our burdens or challenges on this plane and incarnated in a body is really dealing with the trauma
Absolutely.
in those bodies. So I may in my brain know that this behavior, this response to a given situation would be a lot better for me. It would have a better outcome. And yet when I'm faced with a particular situation that pushes into the triggers of my trauma, it can feel almost impossible to access any ability to do the thing that's going to be best for me. Instead, I go into my trauma response. And I think one of the things that I sense about not being in a body is that then you don't have that burden of the trauma interfering with you being able to see clearly.
Yeah. One of the things I think really helps is if you create an ancestor altar that's outside of your body, because until or unless you do that, what your ancestors have to work with is your body, right? So if you externalize it, that's a kind of useful disassociation, right? Where you're like, oh, I'm going to put my ancestor altar over here, and then I'm going to talk out loud to them and have items on there so that I have a place where I regularly communicate with them, and I can start having done my own sexual healing, offering healing to them, right? I frequently in my consent work, I'll have clients and I'm like, wow, I really don't necessarily want to work with this person, right? Because they're coming to see me because they violated someone's consent, because they're either just not present, they're disassociated themselves, their definition of manhood or gender that they've been socialized into includes entitlement to other people's bodies and access to them. So frequently they're not people that I would want to be friends with.
Yeah.
Right. But I need to be able to work with them. So what I say in my altar to my ancestors is, I will take on this work and do this work in the name of clearing the sexual perpetration of my own bloodline. Right. So I've created a situation of merit or a meaning that makes it worthwhile for me to engage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but can you just say a little bit more about the ancestor altar? Like what would be on that?
Well, where can you see my?
Is that an ancestor altar behind you?
I have a little ancestor altar over here. Today they're drinking kombucha. There's a little bell that I ring when I want to talk to them. There's a little panther. There's a rattle. There's a little old woman covered in wax. There's a little vase from Czechoslovakia. There's a little bell from Italy. So I have the places, items from my physical ancestry. There's something from England. There's something from Ireland. I ring the bell when it's time to do active work. So it's like kind of letting them know. And I sing a little song that I don't remember what the original words were, because my friend T.R. Kelly, who still lives outside of Eugene, Oregon, and this is more than 30 years ago that we were in a coven together, but I changed the words. So it's like, ancestors, ancestors, great ancestors. Oh, and you see, I'm used to ringing the bell, so my hand's just doing that. Great mothers, grandmothers, great grandmothers, great fathers, grandfathers, great grandfathers. And you just sing to them, and it helps you feel resonant. It's also, you create a ritual, you're doing some specific things. You have the altar, you're looking at the altar. Sometimes I burn incense. I light the candle, I sing the song, I ring the bell. And then that's, engaging all of my senses. It puts me in a non-beta altered state. And then I say a prayer.
That's beautiful, Teri.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder a little bit about when I was reading your bio, there's talk of sex magic in there. And I'm just wondering, when we're talking about ritual, does sex magic also have a place for healing sexual trauma?
Oh yeah, and I consider dedicating the pleasure that I'm having when I orgasm or ejaculate to my ancestors an act of sex magic, right? So the sex part of sex magic is using sexual energy or activity, whether it's actually touching yourself and pleasuring yourself or just thinking lustily, and anything that uses erotic life force, like even a grounding visualization, if you're thinking about that life force being like the sap of life that nature offers to you, that makes all things go, that energy is from Aphrodite, from love and sex and desire, you know? So that to me is what puts the sex in sex magic.
Okay.
Right. And then traditionally, like more regular sex magic is people using the great right, having intercourse together and then creating it's not called a glyph. I'm not thinking of it right now, but you make a word altogether, a sigil. Thank you. And you release the sigil at the point of highest energy. So that all of that thinking though seems to me to be more masculine oriented. Right. And even in our Aphrodite temples, we have changed that we don't have a cone of power. We have a series of resonant waves. And the easiest way for me to explain that is instead of us going, ah, we go, ah, 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 right? You see, there's a series of waves and it goes on for much longer and it's about group resonance.
Yeah, some of the stuff that I have read about sex magic, I read a whole book on it a few years back, kind of turned me off because I felt like it was very patriarchal and heteronormative. So it was a little bit difficult to relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can say that, do I have that? I wrote a piece called The Line, the Cross and the Circle for a little journal called Numen Natura. And in the beginning, I'm quoting the 29th verse of the Tao Te Ching, which is basically saying, do you think that you can change the universe? The universe is already perfect. And so I'm reframing magic in that piece, that magic doesn't exist for us as willful little boys to exert what we want onto the structure of what exists, right? That magic is really about seeing that nature has designed things perfectly, and it's our job to actually get in the flow of that and see where it's useful to direct our energy, right? So not, right? And that's a different frame than the magic I grew up being taught, even from, you know, which is hilarious because magic, if anything, is female intuitive wisdom.
Right?
Not
and yet even that got
willfulness.
And even that got co-opted.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you're removing the willfulness to it, because that's one thing that has always turned me off about magic. The idea that somehow or another I was going to control.
Yeah,
and my spiritual path has been about giving up control and surrendering to divine will.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you have to trust the will of the divine to be able to do that.
Well, you do, don't you? But if I look around nature, I see a lot of things that are quite beautiful and resonant to me.
That's right. And capitalism puts a frame even on magic, right? Where like most of the young people I know, even when I was young doing magic, were like, well, I want to learn how to get a spell to get the best girlfriend or get the nice car or make $1 million. And I'm like, that's what you think magic is about?
And furthermore, set your sights higher.
Yeah.
look for joy, look for fulfillment, look for peace of mind and serenity, because that's way more important than all that other stuff.
How about feeling deeply satisfied with your life?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
It's hard sell though when you're young, I know.
Yeah.
So, okay, you mentioned nature.
Yeah.
How do the honeybees and the mycelium mat and the stardust come into this picture, Teri?
What's funny right now is that, you know, I've been calling myself an EcoSexual for a long time, But until this year, when I've really gotten back into gardening, because the pandemic made me cancel my, the biggest event I do every year is the EcoSex convergence thing, right?
Right.
For 200 people, and I had to cancel it. So I was like, oh, I'm home, which means I can garden. Because if you in the summer are gone every other weekend to present at festivals and events, you can't really meet the needs of a garden. So I haven't. So now we have this house, and the eco-sexiest thing I've been doing is I had to hand pollinate my zucchini, and then I had to hand pollinate my corn. And so here I am watching videos from Mizzou, which is the university I graduated from with my master's in social work. It's an agricultural university. And so I was watching a hand pollinate your corn video last week. And then on Monday, I did that. You have to take the pollen off the tall tassels on the top and spread it on the silk. And every silk hair, if it's pollinated, will become a kernel of corn on the cob. Did you know that?
I did not know that. And Teri, leave it to you to be the person that'd be out in their garden fucking the plants.
I know, right? That's exactly it. I'm like, okay, this is real eco-sex. The rest of it's all theoretic and metaphor and extrapolation.
Right. No, it's kind of like the EcoSexual stuff has really just been foreplay. You were actually closing the deal.
But we need to do bee magic. Here's my little bees, my little felt bees.
Oh.
Because the bees are in serious trouble.
Yeah.
And so we actually need to learn how to pollinate plants or how to have bees. Now, I know that you, in 2011, we went to my friend Mike Micheltile's place in Sebastopol.
Yes.
I don't know if he still lives there, but I just have been taking a class, a 4-part class about rewilding bees. And what he's doing is encouraging people to have log hives. He's calling it Apis arboreum. He found out, which is fascinating to me, that bees and forests co-evolve, that a forest is a honeybee's natural habitat, that bees like to make a feral hive, and that the wax, when they do it on their own, is in these beautiful lung or vulva shaped hanging swales, right, of comb. And that part of what makes the bees ill is that they don't want to build comb on plastic, which has carcinogenic properties. They don't want to build their whole unit of themselves and have the honey extracted from them, and then they're only being given like corn syrup and stuff.
Yeah.
Right? The honey they make is for their babies and for themselves, right? So anyway, he's teaching people. It's so beautiful. Apis arboretum, and you can find it by going to his Gaia Bees website or his Apis arboretum website. And I'm going to take a log hive creation workshop from him in September and October. And so that people should have their own pollinators. Basically, I'm going to make a pollinator sanctuary for bees where I don't take the honey from them, but I have a hollow log hive latched up into one of the trees that's on my property. And I have a spirit conversation with the bees the same way I'm talking to my ancestors. And I ask them what they need and try to give it to them so that they'll stay around and pollinate my plants. So I don't have to get on my hands and knees with toothbrushes and start pollinating the dahlia and the carrots, because that's hard.
That's great.
Right?
That's great. I remember visiting that bee sanctuary.
Yeah.
It was such a special time for me. And one of the things I loved about him was his intuitive, energetically resonant relationship with his bees.
Yes.
So he didn't put on any special gear. He didn't use any smoke. He took us right out to the beehive. He took the top off. We were allowed to look into the beehive with no protection of any kind, and the bees were so sweet.
They were totally sweet.
Yeah.
They were happy and resonant, and they.
Yes. Yeah. And
something. I love him.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. And I love that he was paying so much attention to what kind of a home do they actually want to live in. And you know something, Teri, I'm sure I shared this with you back in 2011, but shortly after our visit, I came home, and I remember I was just getting out of my car, and a honeybee landed on my hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So about the bees, one of the most beautiful things about the bees, and this is most clearly written up in a book called The Buzz About Bees. I think the author's name is Gunter. I can't remember his last name. There's a movie called Queens of the Sun that has Mikhail and all these other people in it. But the book, The Buzz About Bees, talks about that the bees themselves, the queen, the drones, all the girl bees, all the worker bees, that they're one body, that they're a super organism. And the language that they are now using, interspecies, I mean, it's so interesting. They're really expanding our understanding of what even, he's like, what even is an apian? Like, what is a bee? We don't even know, right? Like, basically the queen is the ovary of the bien. The whole body is the bien, the bien, right? And the drones are the phallus, right? And the worker bees function as the lungs, as the intestines, as the brood. You know, it's just so interesting. And that they function, and he watches them when they hive off. And anyway, so part of the thing that I really enjoy about bees and try to bring into human culture and ecosexual culture is the idea of functioning as a unit. Like, what would it be like if human beings each took on specific roles for a certain number of days that change with the moon and the sun, right? Like, bees have magnetite in them that helps them monitor the electromagnetic pulses of the sun and solar flares. And they also change what they do every 28 days based on the phases of the moon. Did you know this?
I didn't know this at all.
No. Cool. Tiny little bees are that effing sensitive. It's fascinating.
Wow.
Fascinating. And so if we thought that the earth was like the queen bee, and we listened to her impulses and watched her phases and her different seasonal changes and diurnal rhythms, what would our lives be like? How would that be different? I'm super curious and interested in that as an experiment, right?
Yes, I see where you're going with this. If the beehive is a superorganism, then perhaps the biosphere on this planet is also a superorganism. And part of us healing ourselves, our ancestors, this planet, hopefully avoiding future pandemics,
right?
Reversing climate change, all of that comes back down to our, I think, connection to the divine feminine and really getting in sync with what this planet needs in order to thrive as a place for life.
Yeah. And then some of the ideas he has is like, instead of identifying with states with borders or countries with borders, we should be identifying with watersheds and bioregions.
Yeah.
And there should be a certain number of apian sanctuary for every bioregion, right? So if I have one in my yard, then there needs to be one in another 1,000 yards. So we need a certain number of people to agree to have bee sanctuaries. And we're trying to figure out how many bee sanctuaries do we need in each bioregion for the needs of nature to be met, for the needs of the bioregion and the bioregional niche to be met, right? And in a similar way, we could say, how many sacred sexual healers do we need in a bioregion? How many people who speak with the dead and ease epigenetic trauma do we need in a bioregion? How many, permaculture farmers and places that are sanctuaries that are growing foods without pesticides do we need in a bioregion? And each of us just need to be, and then we want to talk to the mushrooms, because the mushrooms and the trees are busy making these deep mycelial mats that transfer minerals and resources back and forth through, growing around the roots. And if we can't openly, publicly have these networks because it's not safe to do so under the current administration, how do we keep making those connections and doing that work until it's time to send out the mushrooms, right? Because the mycelium mat's always there, but mushrooms don't send out their genitalia, which is what the mushrooms are. The mushrooms are the genitals of the mycelium mat.
How's that for you? If you didn't know that, every time you eat a mushroom, you are eating
sex magic.
You're eating genitals,
right? But they don't reproduce until all all the nutrients are necessary to ensure the life cycle of that mushroom. It gets
Oh,
to grow, sporulate, and die back. So it comes up and it reproduces itself and goes back, right? So they're super smart.
well, yes, but not only that, as I understand it, the mushrooms they're very cooperative. So like almost the entire state of Oregon is a mycelium mat. Now, we
Two-thirds of
probably
the
need to
state.
explain what a mycelium mat is to our
Well,
viewers.
sure. Well, our bodies are many, many, many cell walls thick, but some mycelium are only one cell wall thick. And there's a honey mushroom that's only one cell wall thick that covers 2/3 of the acreage of the state of Oregon. Now, if you want to know more about this, there's 2 resources I can refer you to. Paul Stamets is one of them. He has a TED Talk from 2008 called 6 Ways That Mushrooms Can Save the Planet. There's a movie that he made, Louis Schwarzenberg made a movie called Fantastic Fungi that came out late last year, early this year. That's everywhere. You can go to Fantastic Fungi website.
I
And
love
now,
that movie.
I know. And now Merlin Sheldrake has just published a new book called Entangled Life. And so the very first, Louis Schwarzenberg started a podcast called Wonder and Awe that started in June or July. And the first one was a podcast with Paul and Merlin talking about their work. It's super good and totally available for free. And I really recommend that work if you want to understand mushrooms deeper.
Yeah, and the mushroom. So there's a lot of things that we're learning now. Like I just recently learned that the trees also cooperate with each other. So I had always been told that the little trees are competing for the sunlight with the big trees, and I just recently learned that actually the big trees are processing nutrients from the sun and
Yep.
passing it down through the root system to the little trees, so they're actually
Right.
helping them.
Right. The mushroom, the mycelium wrap around the roots of the trees and transfer the minerals and the things that they need back and forth that way. So the mycelium are really the soil magicians. They're really determining and making sure that things get transferred all over. And we need to be able to think constellationally like that.
And let's take this to outer space now, because there is actually a theory that the mushrooms came from other planets.
Yeah, panspermia, is that it? Or pangaea? That mushrooms, right, are the mushroom spores, mycelial spores, were on an asteroid and came into Earth's atmosphere and landed in the water, and first came out of the water and started breaking down rocks and made soil possible. And then that is what led to everything, all the life that's on the planet.
And where do we get that theory? What is?
I think it's called panspermia.
Okay.
You should look it up on Wikipedia even.
Well, obviously, if this was like the moon, something needed to happen here for there to be life. Yeah.
Right.
And
so
this planet was getting pummeled with a lot of asteroids at one time, and now that almost never happens. That's kind of odd, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really odd. But maybe it's because we were closer together. I mean, when I watch this stuff, I think that's really weird. And then actual scientists are like, no, that actually happened. Right?
Yeah.
We're in the middle of the 6th greatest extinction event. But the mycelium have been through all of them. So one of the things that Paul Stamets said is, if you want to survive, it's good to merge with and hang out with and try to understand the beings that have survived all the other extinction events. I'm like, that's freaking smart. There used to be 30-foot tall mycelium, and they found fossils of them in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East.
Whoa.
In the desert, and they're like massive. So there was a time when there was so much dust in the atmosphere kicked up by all the asteroids hitting the planet, right? That it was thick and there wasn't any sunlight, and these specific kind of mushrooms are the only things that could survive.
Amazing.
It's in the Fantastic Fungi movie. This theory and all the details about it. And it's also, some of it's in Paul Stamets' 6 Ways Mushrooms Change the Planet video, but it's also in his book, Mycelium Running, which is from 2005.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is your connection to stardust? I know stardust, mycelium, and bees are like Those are your three spirit
Yeah, I
guides.
think this thing, the stardust, is the mycelial spores coming here. But it also then is, for me, the metaphor for anima, for soul force, right? That stardust, right? Because also, literally, stardust from the Big Bang is in our bones as iron, as different minerals. So how is that even that blows my mind. And that stuff I got from listening to Neil.
Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yes.
Yes. Oh,
Such a hottie.
favorite
Oh my
astronomer.
God.
Love him.
Me
Love
too.
him.
He's great.
Yeah.
So I learned that from watching his show and listening to his videos. And Mark is big into quantum physics, my husband. So
Yeah.
we have these great talks. We get very relaxed and a little high and talk about quantum physics and all these different theories we have.
Right. Oh, it's speaking of getting high. I don't think we could talk about mushrooms without also talking about psilocybin, can we?
We can, because psilocybin is going to, we believe, in November here in Portland, and we've been working on this for several years now, going to become a legally therapy-assisted substance. There are...
And that's specifically for trauma, is it not?
Yes, because it helps people.
Yeah.
It helps people get out of deep PTSD, chronic PTSD states. It helps people who have stage 4 cancer feel hope. And that is also covered in the Fantastic Fungi movie. And there's been lots and lots of clinical trials through MAPS.
Yes.
At reputable institutions like Johns Hopkins University. Also, what is it called? Have a Nice Trip. There's a Netflix produced film that we watched recently. I think it's called Have a Nice Trip. And it's one of the psychologists who worked on MAPS and worked on some of these things, goes through all these people talking about their experiences on psilocybin and other substances and how beneficial those trips have been to them. So that's really great too.
So I do you have any idea? I'm not assuming that you do, but I'm just curious, difference between how MDMA is also something that MAPS is researching to treat PTSD. And then I know they're also researching psilocybin. And I also know that there was a huge article about it. Michael Pollan did some.
I read his book. It's brilliant.
Yeah. So, but do you have a sense of how those two treatment plans differ? Like if you've got PTSD, how do you know whether or not you want to try MDMA or psilocybin as a treatment modality?
Well, and that's one of the great things about having this on the ballot, is that if it becomes legal here, and when it does, and some people are already doing therapeutic assisted trips, right?
Right.
Different conditions are better with different plant medicines.
Okay. And that's probably something we're still learning about.
Yeah, but some people have been doing it consistently, even though it's illegal, for a long time. And so some of those people are kind of experts on it, both from doing the substances themselves and doing trip sitting, is what we call it, right? So guiding people. And so there are now, when this becomes legal in November, that's me knocking on wood.
We're hoping.
There are people like Sherry and, I forgot the name. The couple that are therapists that are leading this Side 2020 initiative here in Portland are, going to do trainings for people. And I'm definitely going to take that training so I can sit with people.
Do it.
And be able to, because I already have a psychiatric background.
Right.
Where my job for many years was to diagnose people. Yeah. Right. And so helping to figure out, okay, there could be surveys where you're like, okay, what are your concerns and issues, and what kinds of anxiety do you have? Right. And then you can basically boutique choose what the best treatment is.
Best treatment. So, and we started this conversation off talking about sexual trauma.
I know.
Do you know whether or not anybody has used psilocybin to treat sexual trauma?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really useful, because that is, in fact, sexual trauma is one of the sources of chronic PTSD.
Boy, is it ever. And I think we need to stress too that we're not talking about just tripping and having a good time.
No. There's a whole bunch of different things. Predominantly, stuff about set and setting. And I'm someone that really believes that having a ritual set and setting where someone has, like the things I was just telling you about how to set up an altar, right? You want to have an intention.
Right.
You want to have all your comfy, cozy things that you need. You want to make sure that if you're going to eat something, that there's healthy food for you. You want to make sure that you're going to do aftercare and get at least a hot soak or a foot bath, or you want to set those things up.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to have somebody that's with you, because just like even in just for peer counseling, right? It does not help you to re-experience trauma without witnessing.
Yeah.
Nothing is guaranteed if you do that. Definitely you're going to have more trauma, right? So even if you want to process stubbing your toe, it is better to have a loving, neutral, and by that I mean their tone towards you is non-judgmental, not they're cold, not neutral as in I don't have any feelings for you, but neutral as in I'm completely for you and I'm here and my attention is completely available to you, right? So that kind of neutral, loving witness is needed for you to process your traumatic experience. So
well, I know you're going to be,
go ahead.
I know you're going to be great at this, Teri, and I hope you get that certification.
Yeah.
I may come see you.
Yeah.
in Oregon, where it'll be legal. Yay!
I know. We'll be the first state. We'll be the first state, but I don't think the last.
Oh no, I would imagine California and Washington will follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could just talk to you for another 4 hours.
So fun.
Really, seriously, Teri, I love you, and I love surfing all of these different realities with you. I'm wondering if there's anything that I should have asked you or anything you want to add to today's.
No, but just that, to the best of our ability, for us to be able to self-soothe, for us to be practicing self-compassion and self-love and radical kindness, gentleness to ourselves and to other people at this time, for us to have the ability to send out golden waves of compassion and care and love in these times. Yeah. And to do the things that you love so that you're in that space where you can afford to be generous energetically. That's really the most important thing. Generous
energetically. I love that. Yeah. And self-care, soothing ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. Because you have to do it for you first.
I'm sure people are going to want to be able to find you so they can learn more about sex magic and EcoSexuality and healing sexual trauma and the living love revolution and all the beautiful things that you're up to. So how should they find you on the internet?
You know, yeah, I still have Living the Revolution.
Yep.
.org.
.org. And I'll post that below the video too.
That's the best way. You can write to me. livingloverevolution@me.com is my email.
Okay.
But my websites are really out of date because I really don't like being on the computer. This is fun because I see you.
Yes.
Right? But I'm not, I've been mostly in my garden, which is so good.
Oh, I love that. In your garden, having sex with the flowers. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Well, Teri, I adore you, and I'm sure our viewers do or will too. And,
thank you so much for your attention, friend.
Oh, sweetheart. Love you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.